Let me ask you a brutal question, a hypothetical that might cut close to the bone. Have you ever pushed yourself past every perceived limit, wrestled with the absolute hardest challenge life could throw at you, endured the crucible of your own making, only to emerge, gasping for air and looking up, to find the single most important person, the one who times should times have been there, conspicuous only by their crushing absence? That hollow ache? That's precisely where this tale begins. My name is Ray Whitmore, or rather it times was times Ray Whitmore. Husband a title, now just a ghost in the corners of my memory since cancer, that relentless thief, stole my June. I'm a father, a contractor of 31 solid years, the kind of man who once prided himself on building things that lasted. And, for the last 3 of those years, in increments so subtle they were almost imperceptible, then with a roar that shook my very foundations, I became an alcoholic. That's the unvarnished truth, the word stripped bare, not dressed up for polite company. Today, I'm also 61 years old, standing outside a recovery center in the unforgiving grip of January. The person who was supposed to be my lifeline, my ride home, isn't here, but we'll get to that. First, do me a quick, invaluable favor. Subscribe. So many people listen, they nod along, they feel a connection, but they never quite click that little button. It costs you absolutely nothing, yet it means everything to us, allowing these stories to find their way to more ears. And while you're at it, hit the like button. Then, after you've heard it all, drop your thoughts, your own echoes of experience, in the comments below. I promise you, you're going to feel something here. The cold was an old friend, or perhaps an old enemy, familiar to anyone who's weathered a Midwest January. Not a raging blizzard, not violent or dramatic, but a quiet, steady cold that seeped deep into the bones, that found its way under the collar of your coat and settled there, determined to stay. It was the kind of cold that didn't argue with you, didn't try to prove a point. It simply reminded you, calmly and without apology, that it had existed long before you drew your first breath and would persist long after your last. Cedar Brook Recovery Center, with its deceptively warm, inviting lobby, handed me a simple manila envelope at precisely 10:58 that morning. A crisp, almost too polite farewell, followed by a generic, "We wish you well." I stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling the hum of the automatic doors as they parted and rejoined in a silent rhythm. My fingers fumbled with the flap of the envelope, peeling it open like I was checking for something I already knew wouldn't be inside. My wallet, a cracked brown leather relic, bought by my daughter Sylvie 4 Father's Days ago, back when Father's Day still felt like an occasion, a reason to put on a tie and pretend everything was perfectly normal. My house keys, heavy and solid in my palm, anchors to a home I wasn't sure I still recognized. A cell phone that had been a silent, dead weight since week 2, its battery long drained, and frankly I had no desire to change that. And then, the grand sum, $40, $3, 3 worn $10 bills, a crumpled 5, 6 singles, and a scattering of change I didn't bother to count. Counting those coins felt like the saddest, most pathetic thing a grown man could do on a Thursday morning in the dead of January. $43. 6 weeks. 42 days. The hardest, most brutal, most nakedly honest work of my entire life, distilled down to that meager sum. And that's what was waiting for me on the other side of those automatic doors. I need you to understand the true nature of those 6 weeks, because this isn't a story about a man who checked into some genteel retreat, ate artisanal meals, did a spot of mindful journaling, and emerged magically fixed. That kind of convenient fiction? That is not what happened. What happened was, I sweated through sheets so completely, so thoroughly soaked, that the quiet, compassionate night nurses, without a single word or request, without ever making me feel one iota worse than I already did, changed them twice before the first hint of sunrise. What happened was I sat in hushed circles with men whose grief was raw and exposed, men who wept openly for sons they'd missed growing up, for Little League games that faded into blurred photographs, for graduations glimpsed only through a haze of regret, for ordinary Tuesday dinners that could never be recovered, no matter how profound their apologies. I didn't judge a single one of them, not even for a fleeting second, because I understood every raw, echoing syllable of that particular grief, personally, intimately. It was a language I now spoke fluently. And what happened, what times happened in the quiet, unforgiving depths of that place, was that I finally talked about June, my June. I spoke of her laugh, which always started silent, a tremor in her shoulders first, before the sound finally arrived, a beat late, as if it had traveled a great distance to reach the room. I spoke of the way she made coffee every single morning, a small, reverent ceremony, performed with such care you'd think she was brewing liquid gold. I spoke of the way our house changed after we buried her, not just empty, but fundamentally altered, like the very air itself had been quietly reformulated, and nobody had thought to warn me. I talked about how the drinking began as a desperate attempt to numb the grief, and then, insidious and relentless, became an inescapable architecture around my life. How, somewhere along the way, it stopped being about missing June and became, terrifyingly, about not knowing how to live in the house she had left behind. How a man can go from, I just need to take the edge off, to, I cannot function without this, so gradually, so imperceptibly, that by the time he finally notices, the distance back looks utterly impossible, an unscalable mountain. I did the work, every raw, humiliating, sacred inch of it. So you'll understand why standing in that lobby at 11:00 on a Thursday in January, watching the automatic doors slide open and shut against the bitter cold, and not seeing Sylvie's car in that empty parking lot, hit me with a force far more devastating than it might sound. It wasn't just disappointment. It was a deeper, colder kind of abandonment. I checked the clock again, my eyes scanning the digital numbers with a desperate hope. 11:06. Then, agonizingly, 11:44. She knew. Had known for 2 full weeks that discharge was set for 11:00 sharp. I had reminded her myself in our last phone call, 9 days ago. The call where her voice had that peculiar quality it sometimes got distracted, slightly far away, as if she were present in the room but facing an entirely different direction, her attention elsewhere. And I'd heard Craig in the background. Hadn't seen him, didn't need to, just his voice. Low, measured, controlled. The voice of a man who always knew exactly what he was doing, and more importantly, exactly what everyone around him was about to do next. I'll be there, Dad. I promise. Right. I watched a young man, couldn't have been older than 24, get picked up by his mother. She was crying before she even cleared the door, her face a mask of joyous relief. She grabbed his face in both hands and just held it, tracing his features as if memorizing him anew, as if she had been rehearsing that exact, precious moment for 6 weeks, and wasn't about to rush a single second of it. It was a tableau of pure, unadulterated love, a mirror image of the reunion I'd so desperately envisioned. Then, a woman around my age, her face etched with a similar weariness, walked out alone, the same manila envelope clutched under her arm. She had that same expression I probably wore, the one that's trying very hard not to be what it is, trying to hold a fragile composure against a rising tide of emotion. Our eyes met for exactly 1 second. In that fleeting glance, we understood each other completely, perfectly, without exchanging a single word. Then a cab pulled up for her, and she was gone, swallowed by the cold January air. No cab for me. Dead phone. $43. And January. At 11:51, I finally pushed myself forward. I stood up, tucked the thin envelope under my arm, its contents a paltry comfort, and walked outside. The cold hit me, clean and immediate, a slap to the face, a stark reminder of the world I was re-entering. 4 blocks east was the bus stop. I knew this because 3 weeks earlier, at 10:00 at night, on a shared computer in Cedarbrook's rec room, some quiet, unsentimental, utterly practical part of me had looked it up. I hadn't admitted to myself why at the time. Standing on that sidewalk, with the wind whipping at my coat, I admitted it now. I started walking. I made it exactly 12 steps. Ray Whitmore? Not a question, but a statement, delivered with the quiet authority of a man who had been holding it ready, perfectly timed. I turned around. He was around 40, broad-shouldered, encased in a charcoal wool coat that fit the way things fit when they're chosen deliberately, tailored with purpose, not just grabbed off a rack. Dark hair, cut close and precise. His eyes were steady, the kind that suggested he had navigated countless difficult rooms and had never been the one to blink first. And I knew that face. The way you know a song before the words come back to you, the melody arriving first, a familiar echo, the rest following slowly behind. Noah Cole. Except the Noah Cole I remembered had been barely 22 years old, with a split lip, a garbage bag for luggage, and the particular exhausted, haunted look of a young man who had used up every last option he had, and was one bad night away from something permanent. He had slept on my couch for 6 weeks in the unforgiving winter of 1997. June, bless her generous heart, had made up the bed with the good sheets, the ones reserved for guests she actually times wanted, times to make feel at home. She had cooked enough dinner for 3 every single night, without being asked, without once making him feel like a burden, because that was June. That was exactly, precisely, completely who she was, a beacon of unconditional kindness. The man standing in front of me now looked like he hadn't lost a case in years, possibly ever. Noah, I managed, the name coming out barely a whisper, a ghost of a sound. He smiled, that same crooked smile, pulling up just on the left side, same as always. You look good, Ray, better than I expected if I'm being straight with you. How long have you been here? About 45 minutes. I stared at him, my mind trying to reconcile the past with the present. It's January, Noah. I brought coffee, he said, completely unbothered, as if showing up out of nowhere in a January parking lot with my specific coffee order was the most natural thing in the world. He reached into his coat and produced a gleaming thermos. Yours is black, I remembered. I took it, the warmth instantly seeping into my numb hands. Because what else do you do when a man you haven't seen in 27 years suddenly materializes in a frozen parking lot, thermos in hand, with your coffee order memorized? We stood there for a moment, 2 men, 2 decades of silence stretched between us, a biting wind that had no interest in either of us. And in that quiet, frozen space, I felt something shift in my chest. Not dramatically, not with the cinematic flourish of a movie scene, but quietly, subtly, the way a door settles into its frame when someone finally closes it the right way, truly shutting out the draft. She's gone, I said, the words heavy and final. He would know who I meant. I know, Noah replied, his voice soft, full of an unexpected understanding. I'm sorry I wasn't there. We let that sit for a moment, allowed it the sacred space it deserved, a brief, silent acknowledgement of shared grief. Then he reached into his coat again and pulled out a phone brand new, still in its pristine sleeve, charged and ready. Got it last week. Last week? I repeated slowly, the implication beginning to dawn on me. You planned this. I've been planning this, he said, his voice dropping just slightly, the shift barely perceptible but charged with intent, since Craig Weston came into the picture. And there it was, said plainly, without drama, without any theatrical build-up, just Craig's name, hanging in the cold January air of a desolate parking lot, spoken by a man I hadn't seen in over 2 decades. It landed exactly the way a name lands when you've been half expecting someone, anyone, to finally say it out loud, to give shape to the nameless unease. What did he do, Noah? Not a question this time either. I realized with a jolt that I had apparently picked up that particular inflection from him. He looked at me for a long moment, measuring something, not my weakness. I'd already proven, in those 6 weeks, that I could handle weakness, could confront it, could survive it. No, he was measuring my readiness. Get in the car, Ray, he said quietly, his gaze unwavering. There's something you need to see, and I need you to hear all of it before you react. Before I react? I almost smiled. Almost. Because here's what 42 days of real serious therapy actually teaches you. It doesn't make you calm. It doesn't sand down your sharp edges or magically transform you into someone who responds to betrayal with a deep cleansing breath and a gratitude journal. What it times does is teach you that in the space, that microscopic, agonizing space between feeling something and doing something, there is a choice. And that choice, however agonizing, however difficult to seize, is the only thing that truly separates the man you were from the man you're desperately trying to become. I got in the car. Noah placed a folder on the console between us, thick, heavy, tabbed, and organized with the quiet precision of a man who had been constructing something carefully, methodically, for a very long time. It was the folder of a man who knew exactly what he was doing when he put it together, and exactly what it was going to do when someone else finally opened it. He turned to the first page, his finger tapping the top of a document. Craig filed a power of attorney 7 weeks ago, he said, his voice measured, each word a stone dropping into still water. 3 days before you checked into Cedarbrook. The words arrived one at a time, each landing with increasing weight. He's been moving money since week 1, methodically. The kind of methodical that tells you this wasn't impulsive, Ray. This was planned, possibly before June passed, possibly long before. My gaze fell to the documents, to the familiar loops and flourishes of my own signature, or rather, something so perfectly engineered it looked exactly like it. I saw account numbers I'd carried for 30 years, transfer dates arranged like a chilling timeline of quiet, deliberate theft. Sylvie, I said, my voice barely a rasp. Doesn't know. Noah's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. He's managed her completely, Ray. He paused, and I could tell this next part had been sitting with him, heavy and unsaid. She didn't choose not to come today. She was told you called, that you said you weren't ready to leave, that you needed more time. I sat with that, let it sink in. My daughter had not abandoned me. She had been lied to, cleanly, confidently, without hesitation, by the man she trusted most in the world. The man who had looked me in the eye at their wedding, shaken my hand firmly and said, I'll take care of her, Ray. You have my word. I looked back through the windshield at Cedarbrook, at those automatic doors still sliding open and shut in the brutal January cold, at the empty parking spot where Sylvie's car should have been, where she had probably times wanted times to be, where she times would times have been, if the man she married hadn't decided that Ray Whitmore was easier to rob when Ray Whitmore was safely out of the way, consumed by his own demons. And right there, in that front seat, with a folder full of my own stolen life lying open on the console beside me, and a thermos of black coffee slowly warming my hands, I made a decision, a clear, unyielding decision. No confrontation, no desperate phone calls, no showing up at my own front door with documents and accusations, watching Craig straighten his tie with that practiced air of indignation and talk his way through it, while Sylvie stood in the kitchen, her face clouded with confusion, trying to figure out which version of the story felt true. No, that wasn't the way. Craig Weston was going to go on believing he had already won. He was going to get comfortable, sloppy, bold in the way men get bold when they think the threat has been utterly eliminated, neutralized, dismissed, and then, quietly, methodically, with the patience of a man who had just spent 42 days learning how to wait, how to truly bide his time, Ray Whitmore was going to take back everything, every single dollar, every single piece of the life that had been snatched away. And the very last thing Craig Weston would ever see coming was the man he left stranded in a parking lot with $43 and a dead phone, because that man just got in the car. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, stories that resonate with a raw, honest chord, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. Thank you, for real. Here's something nobody tells you about revenge, the good kind. The kind that actually means something, that leaves a lasting mark. It looks absolutely nothing like what you see in the movies. There's no dramatic confrontation, no table-flipping histrionics, no perfectly timed moment where you burst through a door and deliver exactly the right line at exactly the right volume. The good kind of revenge is quiet. The good kind, from the outside, looks like absolutely nothing at all, and that, precisely, is what makes it so devastatingly effective. Noah had a place for me, a simple one-bedroom apartment on the east side of Columbus. Nothing fancy, nothing memorable, exactly the kind of building you drive past every day without ever truly registering it. Beige walls, decent heat that hummed quietly through the vents, and a window that looked out onto a parking lot that was decidedly, times not times, Cedarbrook's. He had stocked the refrigerator with enough food for 2 weeks. A silent, thoughtful gesture. On the kitchen counter, he'd left a handwritten note, brief and to the point. Don't contact Sylvie yet. Trust the process. I'll be in touch by Friday. I stood in that kitchen on a Thursday afternoon in January, holding a thermos of now cold coffee, and a folder full of irrefutable evidence that my son-in-law had been dismantling my life with the calm efficiency of a man doing yard work, pruning unwanted branches. And I made myself a sandwich, turkey, mustard, wheat bread, because that's what you do when the alternative is picking up a phone and saying something you can never take back. I ate the sandwich. I looked out the window. I thought about June, the way I always did when things got unbearably still, not with the drowning, all-consuming grief of before, but with something quieter now, something that felt cautiously, and for the very first time, like gratitude. She would have known exactly what to do, I thought, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. She always did. Then I went to bed at 9, like a man with a plan and a bedtime. Craig Weston, meanwhile, had absolutely no idea, and that was the most important thing of all. Noah had been precise about this from the beginning, laying out the stakes in the car. The moment Craig knows you're out, and you know what he did, he told me, his voice low and firm, he'll lawyer up, move the remaining assets, and we'll spend the next 3 years in soul-crushing litigation while he lives in your house and sleeps in your daughter's bed. We cannot tip our hand. Not yet. Not even close to yet. So, as far as Craig knew, Ray Whitmore had walked out of Cedarbrook on a Thursday morning, found no ride waiting, and had quietly disappeared into whatever sad, diminished life awaited, a broke, recently rehabbed 61-year-old with no resources and no plan. Which, to be fair, was a completely reasonable thing for Craig to assume, because that's who Craig times thought times I was. That was his one fatal mistake. And I was going to let him live inside it for as long as it took. Noah called Friday morning at 8:15 sharp. "How'd you sleep?" "Like a man who doesn't drink anymore," I said, a dry chuckle escaping my lips. "Which is either very well or not at all, depending on the night." He laughed, a short, genuine sound. "We need to talk about the financial picture. All of it. Can you come to my office Monday morning?" "Noah," I said, feeling a familiar frustration bubble up. "I have $43 and no car." "Ray," he replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. "I have a driver." Of course he did. His office was downtown, on the 14th floor. The kind of office that doesn't need to announce itself because everything in it already has. The panoramic view of the city, the understated yet undeniably expensive furniture, the particular quality of silence that exists only in rooms where serious things get decided, where futures are reshaped. His name was on the door in clean silver letters, sleek and authoritative. Noah Cole, attorney at law. I stood in the hallway and looked at it for a moment, longer than necessary, letting the stark contrast with the past wash over me. In 1997, this man had owned one pair of worn jeans and a library card. Asterisk, June asterisk, I thought, a pang of longing twisting in my gut. Asterisk, you should see this asterisk. His assistant, a composed young woman named Diane, who had the unshakable energy of someone who had seen everything and was impressed by none of it, brought coffee without being asked, setting a fresh legal pad in front of me, as if she already knew I was going to need it. Noah sat across from me and opened a second folder, this one even thicker than the first, a silent testament to the depth of the rabbit hole we were about to dive into. "All right," he said, his gaze steady, "here's where we are." What followed was 45 minutes of information delivered in the calm, methodical tone of a man who had learned long ago that the facts themselves were damaging enough, devastating enough, without the need for any additional dramatics. Craig had forged the power of attorney using a notary who Noah had already meticulously discovered had lost his license in another county 2 years prior and was currently operating illegally. 3 of my accounts, my primary checking and 2 investment accounts, had been drained completely, leaving only ghost entries in their wake. A 4th, a savings account, June and I had opened in 1989, the one we'd affectionately called the someday account, because we were always going to do something meaningful with it someday. A big trip, a cabin, a philanthropic venture. That account had been reduced to a paltry $11. $11 from 44,000. I looked at that number on the page for a long, silent time, trying to absorb the magnitude of the theft, the cruel irony of the sum. "There's more," Noah said, and his voice shifted just slightly, not softer exactly, but more deliberate, the way a doctor's voice shifts, becoming gravely serious, just before delivering the part of the diagnosis that requires your absolute, undivided attention. Craig has done this before. I looked up, my eyes meeting his. His first marriage. Her name was Donna. Her father was a retired teacher named Walter Briggs, 73 years old, a widower, living alone in Dayton. Craig married Donna in 2009, had power of attorney over Walter within a year, and had systematically drained his accounts by 2012. Walter never recovered financially. He passed away in 2019. The room was utterly quiet, the air thick with the weight of that information. Donna divorced Craig in 2013, Noah continued, his voice picking up a quiet cadence. She didn't press charges because Craig had convinced her that Walter had approved every transaction, had given his blessing. By the time she found out the truth, the money was gone, and the paper trail had been managed. Managed. The word sat in the room like something with immense, suffocating weight. "He's a professional," I said, the words heavy with dawning realization. "He's practiced," Noah corrected, a subtle but significant distinction in his tone. "There's a difference. A professional is good at what they do. Craig is good at times he chooses." He paused, letting that sink in. He chooses people who are grieving, people who are distracted, people who have someone who loves them enough to trust the person times that person times chose. I thought about Sylvie, about how she had looked at Craig on their wedding day. Not the starry-eyed, naive look of a young woman in a movie, but something quieter and more adult than that. The look of a woman who had lost her mother young, and then, slowly, had seen her father slip away into the clutches of grief and addiction. The look of a woman who had finally times, found something that felt stable, solid, reliable. Craig had seen that look, recognized that profound vulnerability, and chosen her for it. That thought sat in my chest like a cold, hard stone. "What about Walter's daughter?" I asked, my voice rough. "Donna." Noah allowed himself a small, precise smile, a flash of genuine satisfaction. "I spoke with Donna Briggs 3 weeks ago. She's been waiting 7 years for someone to call her. Now, here is where I need you to stay with me, because this is the part of the story where, on the surface, absolutely nothing appears to be happening. And that appearance? It's completely intentional. Ray Whitmore did not confront Craig Weston in week 2. Ray Whitmore did not call Sylvie in week 3. Ray Whitmore did not appear at Craig's office, or show up at his gym, or arrange any kind of dramatic, emotionally satisfying encounter that would have felt deeply gratifying in the moment, and completely, utterly destroyed everything Noah was so carefully, painstakingly building. What Ray Whitmore did was disappear, completely, quietly, like smoke dissipating into the cold January air. And Craig Weston, who had expected, at minimum, a phone call full of accusations he could calmly deflect, or a shouting match he could easily win, got silence instead. And silence, for a man like Craig, was unsettling in a way that accusations never could be. Because accusations, you can answer. Silence, you can only wait out, its unseen weight pressing down on you. I heard through Noah's quiet, discreet channels that Craig had told Sylvie her father had probably relapsed, that it was sad, but not surprising, that some people simply couldn't sustain recovery, that the pull was too strong. He had said it gently, with the practiced sorrow of a man performing concern for an audience of one, and Sylvie had cried in the kitchen on a Sunday night while Craig rubbed her back, his hand a comforting weight, and murmured, "I know, sweetheart, I know." I heard that, every sickening detail, and I sat with it in my beige apartment, and I did not call her. Because Noah had said not yet, and Noah had 14 years of experience, and a name on a 14th floor door, and a woman named Donna Briggs in Dayton who had been waiting 7 years for justice. And I trusted him, with a fierce, unwavering faith, the way you trust someone who once had nothing and, with sheer grit and relentless determination, built everything. Carefully, deliberately, one solid brick at a time. But here's what Craig didn't know. Here's what was happening while Ray Whitmore was being quiet. Noah had filed 3 separate motions in 2 different courts, each one surgical, each one designed to do exactly one specific thing without appearing connected to the others, like gears in a meticulously crafted machine. A title search, a mundane request for property records, had revealed something that made Noah set down his coffee cup and sit very still for a full minute before slowly, deliberately, picking up his phone to call me. "Ray," he said, his voice unusually hushed, a slight edge of excitement beneath the calm. "Do you remember a piece of land on the east side? Corner of Maple and Route 9? About 2.5 acres? I thought about it, a distant memory surfacing. June's father, a gruff but kind man, had left that to us years ago. We never did anything with it, just held on to it, a forgotten asset." "Yeah," I said, a flicker of confusion. "We never developed it. Why?" A pause. The particular kind of pause that precedes information that changes absolutely everything, shifting the entire landscape beneath your feet. "Because Craig's entire development project," Noah said, his voice now a quiet hum of victory, "the one he's been using your money to fund, the one he's poured hundreds of thousands into, is built on a title assumption that falls apart the very moment that deed surfaces." I sat down slowly, the realization washing over me like a cold wave. "His lawyers missed it," Noah stated, and in his voice now I heard it. That carefully calibrated, deeply professional satisfaction of a man whose meticulously crafted plan had begun to hum into perfect operation, precisely as designed. "The entire project, Ray," he continued, the words weighty with implication, "it's sitting on a foundation that legally doesn't exist without your signature, a phantom structure waiting for its inevitable collapse." I sat down slowly on the worn sofa in my beige apartment, the full realization of what he meant washing over me like a cold, cleansing wave. I looked out the window, past the faded curtains, at the mundane tableau of the parking lot below. Somewhere across town, Craig Weston was, at this very moment, likely sharing dinner with my daughter in her house. perhaps even offering her some condescending advice. He would be sleeping well tonight, believing he had won, truly won, the battle for my life and my legacy. Let him, I thought, a quiet resolve hardening within me. Let him enjoy every last, oblivious second of it. Because the crucial thing about disappearing completely, the profound truth Craig never understood and never would, is that a ghost doesn't haunt you by making noise, by screaming or rattling chains. A ghost haunts you by being everywhere you look, a silent, pervasive presence, until the moment you finally realize it was there all along, an unshakable specter in the corner of your vision. There comes a pivotal moment in every man's life, a crossroads where he is given the chance to decide, not who he was, not who he almost became, not the fractured version of himself that grief built or addiction hollowed out or betrayal tried to bury in a forgotten parking lot with a paltry $43 and a dead phone. No, this is the moment he chooses who he finally, completely, irrevocably is. Mine arrived on a crisp Wednesday night in March, and I was, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, dressed for the occasion. Noah had laid out the groundwork 2 weeks prior, sitting across from me in his impeccably organized 14th floor office. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with quiet strength, and 3 empty coffee cups formed a silent testament to the long hours between us. The city council meets the 3rd Wednesday of every month, he'd said, his tone even and deliberate. Craig attends every single one. He's been pushing his development permits through committee for 6 months, a relentless siege of bureaucracy. This month, this particular meeting, he's expecting final approval. He's certain of it. He slid a slender, yet profoundly significant, document across the polished desk. He's expecting it, Noah reiterated, a subtle, dangerous edge to his voice, because he has no idea that we filed a title objection with the county recorder's office 11 days ago. And he has no idea that the objection is not only valid, but ironclad. A beat of silence stretched, taut with anticipation. And he has no idea, Noah finished, allowing himself the smallest, most fleeting smile I had ever seen on a man's face, the kind that cost something deep inside to suppress, a silent eruption of triumph. He paused, letting the full weight of his words settle. He has no idea, Noah continued, his gaze piercing, that the man whose signature is required to resolve this entire mess is not only alive and well, but has been sitting quietly in a beige apartment on the east side for the last 6 weeks, watching, waiting, for exactly this moment. He'll be there, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the tremor that had haunted it for years. Front row, Noah confirmed, a predatory certainty in his eyes. He always sits front row, where he can be seen, where he can project his manufactured image of success. I nodded slowly, the implications solidifying. What do I do? I asked. A primal hunger for action stirring within me. Nothing, Noah replied, those 2 simple words carrying the impossible weight of everything that had led us to this point. You sit in the back. You let him see you. That's all. 2 words. And the world shifted. I bought a new coat. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that would scream for attention. I was, after all, a 61-year-old contractor from Columbus, not a man auditioning for the cover of a magazine. But it was good wool, a deep, dignified charcoal gray, and it fit properly, hugging my shoulders with a reassuring solidity. And when I looked in the mirror of that quiet beige apartment on the Wednesday evening in March, I saw something I had not seen reflected there in a very, very long time. I saw Ray Whitmore. Not the hollowed-out husk of a man who had been quietly disappearing for 3 years inside a bottle of cheap whiskey. Not the desperate figure who had stood in a freezing parking lot in January with a dead phone and a handful of coins he couldn't bring himself to count. Not the ghost of the man June had married, faded and insubstantial. I saw Ray Whitmore whole and sovereign, his gaze clear-eyed, his presence undeniable. You look good, I told the mirror, and for once, the mirror, with its unflinching honesty, agreed. I picked up my coffee, black and strong, from the thermos, because some things I had learned become ritual, and ritual, in turn, becomes identity, and I walked out the door. The city council meeting was held in the Riverside Community Center on Broad Street, a nondescript brick building that smelled faintly of old floor wax and stale coffee. The parking lot was half full, dotted with cars belonging to local residents and weary civic servants. Inside, the harsh glare of fluorescent lights cast an unflattering pallor over rows of folding chairs. A long laminate table at the front seated 6 council members, their water glasses catching the light their expressions a familiar blend of earnestness and subtle resignation, the specific countenances of people performing civic duty on a Wednesday night. I arrived at 7:14, 4 minutes after the meeting officially began. I pushed open the back door quietly, careful not to draw attention, and stepped inside. The room held perhaps 60 people, a scattering of local business owners, concerned residents, and a few men in expensive suits clustered toward the front, their posture radiating a nervous urgency, the silent plea of those who needed something approved. And there, front row, center seat, in a charcoal blazer that probably cost more than my first truck, was Craig Weston. He was leaning slightly forward, elbows resting casually on his knees, talking quietly to the man beside him with the easy, almost arrogant confidence of someone who already knew precisely how the evening was going to unfold. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed. His Italian leather shoes gleamed. Everything about Craig Weston was always perfect, an unblemished facade. I found an empty seat in the last row, nestled into the corner, an unnoticed observer. I set my thermos on my knee, the warm weight, a small comfort, and I watched him. For 3 full minutes, I simply watched. I let my gaze settle, unwavering, across the fluorescent-lit expanse of the room. And then, the way you sometimes feel unseen eyes on you, a prickling sensation that disrupts your focus, the way you sense a subtle shift in the weather before the clouds even gather, Craig Weston went utterly still. His head turned slowly, an involuntary, almost primal response, the way a body knows something is profoundly wrong before the mind has caught up to the dread. His eyes, once so dismissive, found me across that room like they had no other choice, drawn by an invisible current. And Craig Weston's face, that perfectly composed, carefully constructed, always prepared mask of confidence, went the color of a late, cold, February sky, a chilling, ashen gray. I didn't move. I didn't nod, didn't raise my coffee thermos in a silent toast. I didn't smile or point or make any gesture that could be misread as a threat or a greeting. I just looked at him, my gaze holding his, unflinching. The way a man looks when he's been to hell, and somehow, against all odds, found his way back. The way a man looks when he knows something, a deep, unsettling truth that shatters illusions. Craig, visibly rattled, finally turned back to the front of the room. I watched his jaw tighten, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. I watched him say something brief, almost imperceptible, to the man beside him. And then I watched his right hand, resting casually on his knee, slowly close into a white-knuckled fist, then deliberately, almost agonizingly open again. There it is, I thought, a quiet satisfaction blossoming in my chest. There's the crack in his perfect facade. The development permit came up on the agenda at 7:41. The council chairwoman, a steady, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Owens, who had clearly navigated 10,000 of these meetings and possessed patience for exactly none of the attendant drama, read the item number aloud. Her voice was flat, efficient. She then asked, in a tone that expected no opposition, if there were any outstanding objections before the committee moved to a vote. Noah stood up from 3 rows behind Craig, a quiet ripple through the room. Craig, hearing the subtle shift, the almost imperceptible movement, turned once more, and whatever vestige of color had managed to return to his face in the preceding 20 minutes drained away again, immediately and completely, leaving him starkly pale. It did not come back. "Patricia," Noah said, his voice as calm and collected as a man ordering breakfast. "Noah Cole, counsel for Ray Whitmore." He paused, letting the name hang in the air, a silent bomb. "We filed a title objection with the county recorder 11 days ago regarding parcel 4471B, which comprises approximately 2.5 acres at the corner of Maple and Route 9. That parcel, Patricia, is the foundational title assumption for the entire Weston Development Project currently before this committee. The deed, I must emphasize, has been in continuous ownership by the Whitmore family since 1987. It was never transferred, never sold, and never legally encumbered. We have the original documentation here for the record." He then set a thick, bound document, clearly labeled and meticulously organized, on the council table with the quiet, understated authority of a man placing the final, incontrovertible piece of a complex puzzle he had been building for months, if not years. The room shifted, a collective intake of breath, a subtle hum of dawning realization. The way rooms always shift when something truly real, something profoundly disruptive, enters them. Patricia Owens, ever professional, looked down at the document, her gaze lingering on its cover. Then she looked at her colleagues, a silent exchange passing between them. Finally, her eyes settled on Craig Weston, who was sitting in the front row, utterly still, staring at nothing. His perfect face, doing something it had probably never been asked to do before. Absolutely nothing. "Mr. Weston," Patricia said, her voice devoid of emotion, "were you aware of this title issue?" The pause that followed lasted 4 agonizing seconds. I counted each one. "I'll need to consult with my attorneys," Craig finally managed, his voice thin, reedy, stripped of its usual bluster. "Of course," Patricia replied, her tone betraying no surprise, no particular concern. "We'll table the item pending resolution." She then moved on to the next agenda item, with the cool, practiced efficiency of a woman who had seen men like Craig Weston before, men whose grand schemes unraveled with a simple legal objection, and knew she would see them again. She was not, it seemed, particularly moved by any of it. Just like that. No explosion, no dramatic arrests, no eloquent, impassioned speech from me. Just a thick, bound document resting innocently on a table, and a permit that would now never be approved. Craig's entire project, the one meticulously built with my money, on a flawed title assumption his high-priced lawyers had somehow completely missed, a venture funded by the brazen theft from a man he had left for dead in a parking lot in January, was now tabled, suspended indefinitely, legally paralyzed. I picked up my thermos, the coffee still warm, and stood up quietly. Without a backward glance, I walked out the back door, slipping away before Craig could collect himself enough to even consider following. 3 weeks later, Craig Weston was served. The charges were numerous and damning: fraud, forgery, financial elder abuse. Noah had coordinated meticulously with Donna Briggs's attorney in Dayton, and the 2 cases together painted a picture so clear, so damning, that no jury would have difficulty reading it. Craig's business partner, upon learning the full scope of what the title objection meant for their shared liability, had already retained separate counsel, and was, I heard, fully cooperating with the authorities. Craig's perfectly constructed world was collapsing, brick by expensive brick. Sylvie called me on a Tuesday morning. I answered on the second ring, my heart thrumming with a mixture of hope and apprehension. She didn't say anything for a long moment, the silence stretching across the phone line. I could hear her breathing, shallow and hesitant. I could almost feel the particular quality of that silence, heavy and laden, meaning she was holding something immense, something she didn't yet know how to set down. "Dad," she finally said, her voice breaking on that single fragile word in a way that told me everything. It spoke volumes, that she knew, that she was profoundly sorry, that she had been lied to, manipulated, and had only just understood the full, devastating shape of it. "I know, baby," I said, my voice thick with emotion, the old ache in my chest easing slightly. "I didn't," she started, her voice choked with tears. "I know," I gently interrupted. "He told me you called. He said you were just angry." "Sylvie," I said, her name a soft balm, the way I used to say it when she was small and frightened and needed the fear to be interrupted, the darkness to be banished. "I know it wasn't you. It was never you, my girl." She cried then, a deep, cleansing, real kind of crying, not the polite, composed tears she'd shed at her mother's funeral. And I sat there, in my quiet, beige apartment, and I let her, because sometimes the most important, most profound thing a father can do is simply stay on the line, holding space for the unraveling, for the healing to begin. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes that morning. It was, without a doubt, the best conversation I'd had in 4 years. A bridge rebuilt, stone by painful stone. The recovered assets, a fortune I never truly wanted for myself, funded something June had always dreamed of, something close to her heart, a small community recovery space. It wasn't a cold clinical facility, nothing institutional or sterile. It was just a warm, inviting room with good coffee brewing, comfortable folding chairs arranged in a circle, and people willing to sit and, for perhaps the first time, tell the truth about their lives. We named it the June Whitmore Center, a testament to her enduring spirit. Noah, ever the steadfast ally, sat on the board. Donna Briggs, her own battle fought and won, drove up from Dayton for the opening ceremony. She shook my hand, holding it for a moment longer than a simple handshake requires, the way people do when the gesture is standing in for something that doesn't yet have a name: shared grief, shared victory, shared humanity. And in the small, carefully landscaped park beside the center, a piece of land at the corner of Maple and Route 9 that I donated to the city on one simple condition, there is a bench. It's made of simple wood and sturdy iron, unpretentious and enduring. On its back, a small polished plaque reads, "For June Whitmore, who made up the good sheets, who always made enough for three, who saw something beautiful in people, before they could ever see it in themselves." I sit on that bench every morning, my black coffee steaming in my thermos, enveloped by the particular, profound quiet of early morning before the world awakens and gets loud. And as I sit here, watching the world begin its day, I want to leave you with what I've learned, not as a man who won some grand prize, but as a man who almost lost everything and, by some grace, somehow didn't. Grief is not an excuse for the choices we make, but it is undeniably a powerful reason, a force that shapes us, and reasons, I've come to understand, deserve to be understood and honored before they are judged. The people who betray you, who seek to diminish you, are always counting on you to stay broken, to remain trapped in the ruins of their making. The most powerful, most defiant thing you can ever do is to heal anyway, to rise, not for them, but for yourself. Sobriety, for me, was not merely an absence of a destructive habit. It saved me from myself, from the very core of my own despair. It left me standing, clear-eyed and present, ready to face the world when everything else, both good and bad, finally arrived. And the stranger who showed up in that parking lot, the man who offered me a card when I had nothing left, he wasn't a miracle, not in the traditional sense. He was, in a profound and beautiful way, the return on an investment made in 1997 by a woman with good sheets and an impossibly generous heart. He was living proof that every decent, truly kind thing you do for another human being goes somewhere, that it echoes and ripples outward, even when you can't see where, and especially when you can't see where it will lead. Craig Weston sits in a courtroom now, a pale shadow of his former perfect self. Every now and then Sylvie comes and sits beside me on this bench. She brings her own coffee, doesn't say much, just sits, her presence a quiet balm. And together, we watch the light come up over the park, painting the world in hues of orange and gold, a promise of new beginnings. Her mother, I know, would have loved this bench so much. For everyone who ever did the hardest thing, who fought their battles in silent solitude, and looked up to find nobody there, keep going. Your strength, your resilience, is a beacon. If you enjoyed this story, if it resonated with you, I invite you to join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories that speak to the heart of what it means to be human. And please, share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who needs a reminder that hope always finds a way. And as always, thank you for being a part of this community. I will see you on the next one.